Hello.
Hey, Marissa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all
Hi everyone, and thanks to everyone that is joining us. We're just going to give it a minute or two for people to trickle in and then we'll get started. But whilst you're joining, please do write in the chat who you are and where you're from, and if or whether you have any involvement in food systems work. If you don't, please introduce yourself anyway. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so I'll start us off now. It's been a few minutes. I'm sure there'll be people trickling in, but so just to start off with a tiny bit of housekeeping, this is going to be filmed. So throughout the webinar, people will have their cameras and their microphones off, but there will be an opportunity midway to have your cameras on and to have a little bit of conversation. So just do be aware that this is going to be filmed and will be put on the Edible Cities Network YouTube channel, just so you know if you're putting your camera on. Secondly, at the end, there will be a survey, and we'd love if you could stick around for 2 or 3 minutes to fill it out. It will just be online, but it really helps us continue creating content that people want to see and helps us make sure that we're doing the right kind of webinars that are of interest to you. And thirdly, just for any newcomers, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what kind of work you do with food systems. Even if you don't work with food systems, introduce yourself. We'd love to hear from you. So today we've got a jam-packed hour of conversation around building alliances, and it's great to see so many people here because this is a topic that is really close to our hearts as a food partnership. And that topic is about how you build alliances with city authorities to make your cities more social and more edible. And with us today, we've got Vic Borrell, who's the director of the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership. The Brighton and Hove Food Partnership is a not-for-profit organisation that works to transform the food system in Brighton and Hove and across the whole country to make sure that everyone has access to healthy, sustainable and fair food. You have myself, Ruth Smart, who's a project officer at the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership. I'm going to be moderating this session. And we have Angela Blair joining us from the Brighton and Hove City Council. Angela Blair works as the city's first food policy officer. And that's quite an exciting new role, which is all about helping develop and continue the cross-sectoral food work that Brighton is renowned for. And by that, I mean work that doesn't just designate food to one kind of council department, such as health or the environment, but really sees food as a holistic area for change and transformation. But we'll touch on that more in a second. And finally, we have Dr. Ina Zoimel joining us from the Humboldt University in Berlin. Ina is the principal investigator of the Edible Cities Network project, which is an EU-funded project that explores how nature-based solutions can be used to create more socially resilient, green and edible cities. Ina is a researcher, primarily researching ecology, And I'm going to hand over to her in a second because she's going to introduce the Edible Cities Network project briefly to you all so you can understand why we in Brighton are working with them and how food ties us all together. So without further ado, Ina, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Ruth, for this nice introduction, and welcome everybody to this workshop. I'm really interested, what we will discuss. I only want to use some brief slides with some insights on EdiCitNet. You can see we are many partners from all over the world, researchers, but many initiatives, city administration, which are here. And in the next slide, we would like to introduce a bit our mission and co-creation strategy. We learned actually from initiatives like Brighton Hove Food Partnership that edible city solutions overcome the mismatch between nature-based solutions and citizens by deepening the social dimension of nature-based solutions. So we learn from these initiatives. We aim to mainstream successful co-creation practices of edible city solutions, and these solutions help to co-create the sustainable development of the society in the cities to proactively change the urban environment to their own benefits and to induce also a paradigm shift of lifestyle. Next slide, please. Edible city solutions for all are all different forms of urban farming, urban food production, distribution, and consumption. And these solutions use innovative principles of ecological design, closed material, and energy flows. Next slide, please. And what is really important, we have this, this approach on co-creation. We build local and regional networks and hopefully also global networks of communities of knowledge and practice. So in our project, everyone is an expert, and we have collective learning processes in our cities. And yeah, this helps us to grow together. Next slide. Yes, that's my short introduction, and I hand it over back to Ruth. Please go on.
Thanks, Ina. Thanks for that. So I'm now going to pass over to Vic, who's the director of the Food Partnership, and she's going to spend a little bit of time introducing who we are, what we do, and also telling us a little bit about the city Brighton and Hove. We're hoping to show a video, having a few technical hiccups, but we will let you know whether that's possible. Okay, over to you, Vic.
Thank you, Ruth. I think what I'm going to do in the interest of giving us a bit more time to fix the video is actually go up to the bit with the Mentimeter and then show the video afterwards, just so that, because otherwise I haven't got time to load the video. Anyway, hello, everybody. We love a technical hitch. My name's Vic and I work for the Brighton Hove Food Partnership, and I have done since 2006. So although the story of the Food Partnership starts in 2003, and the early years were very much about an organisation, a volunteer-led organisation in development, I have been around for quite a lot of it. So I've got quite a lot of the history about how this relationship has worked. As Ruth said, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We do get some funding from Brighton Hove City Council for specific pieces of work, but we also bring in a lot of our own money, either through running our social enterprise cookery school, but also through grants and trusts and things like the National Lottery in the UK, which funds good causes. We were the UK's first food partnership. There are approximately 50 across the UK now. And we wrote one of the first UK food strategies. There's always a bit of debate between us and London as to who actually published first, but we don't mind a bit of friendly competition with our big neighbour. As Ruth also said, we do a lot of complex and varied work, but actually when it comes down, it's really simple. We just want people to have healthy and sustainable food, and that to be for everyone. Next slide, please, Ruth. So our approach is to work very closely with our local authority, and we have done right from the beginning, but we're independent. And this is really important because one of the things I'll touch on later is this role of critical friend and how you can actually engage with your local authority or city authority without actually always agreeing with them. We are not frightened of the complexity of food. All too often, people want a really simple solution. They want to say, do this and this will happen. As any of us working in food know, that is not the reality of food work. It is never as simple as eat this, this will be achieved. But food is also magical because it goes beyond just being a tool for the food system improvement. It actually can transform our city. It can transform our city's health, our social connections, our well-being, and our economy. And so we're ambitious. We have written 3 food strategies now, and each time we go higher and deeper and more ambitious in what we're trying to achieve. And this balance between, which Ina mentions, between working both at a policy level and a grassroots level is absolutely fundamental to what we do, because by having these community gardens, these kitchens, these composting projects, all networking together, that means that our policy recommendations are grounded in reality and are not just what somebody sat in a room is like, oh, what should we think about this? And finally is to say that our approach is place-based. Next slide, please, Ruth. The reason this is important is because you can't take a one-size-fits-all blueprint of a food strategy and dump it on top of every city. You can use a framework, and we are part of something called Sustainable Food Places, which provides that framework, but we really believe you need to work with what your city is. And this is where an alignment with the city authority also comes in, because that's what city authorities do. They look at their population demographics, they look at their need, and then they make decisions on how their spending happens. So by doing this, we're immediately quite well aligned with each other in terms of approach. Next slide. So Brighton and Hove is a city of 2 stories, we say, and this is the story of many of you will have visited. It's a really popular place to come to, and you'll have seen the affluent centre. We have the first Green MP in the UK. We have lots going on in terms of one side of the city, but then we also have a lot of poverty. We have a lot of very poor housing. We have a lot of food insecurity and poor health. So our food strategy looks to narrow those gaps, not widen them. And that is an absolute fundamental principle that we have as an approach, as a community organisation, that the city authority also has an approach. And again, it's about trying to find these overlaps. Next one. I just wanted to show you this picture to give you a sense of the joyous thing that is the Food Partnership's community food work. Because one of the things I say we bring to the table always is that we are positive, right? We are there with enthusiasm, energy, and an absolute commitment that this can work. And I'm going to say this now, is that I think for people who work in city authorities who spend a lot of time with the things they can't do and the frustrations of what they're working within, being able to be involved with something that has got some joy and fun is also why this works. Because when it comes down to it, your city authority people that you're trying to influence are humans too, and they want to come and sit and have a nice meal, and they want to rummage around in the bin to see the worms. So we really, really work on that element of the project. Ruth, the next one I think is the film. So shall we skip that for now and come back to it? When I talk about using food as a solution to issues in the city, that is because food is a great conversation starter. There's nobody who can't have a conversation with you about something to do with food. And once you begin to have that conversation, you can see where it goes. So to make this webinar a little bit more interactive, we've decided that we're going to get you to use one of the tools that we might normally use when we come into a workshop or a room for a discussion, which is to ask you a question about food and then have a look at the answers. Feel free to use the Mentimeter either by scanning the screen with your phone or by actually going onto that web address. And Ruth, there is one question, is there on there for people to answer? I'm hoping that everybody can see this. And the question is, what foods trigger strong memories for you? So I want you to think about what makes you either think of a place or a time or a person, and pop your answer in the Mentimeter, and we'll see what's coming in from people involved in this lunchtime webinar today. How are we doing, Ruth?
Yeah, just check it. Is that working for people? Is there a question coming up? Oh,
there we go. avocado juice. I don't even know what that is.
Do feel free to write in the chat as well, telling us a little bit more about why these foods bring about strong memories for you. We'd love to hear it.
There's quite a few puddings coming up there. That's nice to see. Brighton Rock, the sweets you get at the seaside. Marissa, you must have very strong teeth if that is one of yours. Okay. So thank you for doing that. I think really, as I say, one of the things we wanted to do was sort of show you how we would always start a session, having a conversation, whether that's with the leader of the council or whether that's with people from the health service, from businesses, is by finding that connection around food, that sense of saying, okay, we're about to try and agree to do some things together. Let's talk about food first. So thank you for that. I'm going to go back over to the presentation now, and I'm going to ask Ruth whether or not the film is actually ready to go if we want it to be in the meantime.
Yeah, I think it is. I think Marissa just needs to share her screen and we can do it from there.
So one of the things that we have done in Brighton and Hove is work together between the Food Partnership, all the community organisations, businesses and the local authority to apply for Gold Sustainable Food Places status. This is a national award that we were the first place in the UK to achieve. Bristol now also have their gold award, and there's lots of other places have got silver or bronze. This is a short film that we made about the award, and I just wanted to show it because it gives quite a good introduction to the sort of work we've been doing in Brighton.
Brighton and Hove have just received the first ever Gold Sustainable Food Place Award. The Sustainable Food Places Network brings together towns, cities, boroughs and counties across the UK that are working to ensure everyone has access to affordable, healthy and sustainable food. Across East and West Sussex, local producers are providing the city with fruit, veg, dairy and meat, either to households or to the retail and hospitality industry, in the most efficient and waste-free methods possible. Shops like social supermarkets through to cafes, pubs and markets are all working side by side to promote local, seasonal produce. There are innovative food markets, one offering a buy one, give one service, enabling distribution of food boxes to low-income households. There is a long history of trailblazing businesses taking an environmentally sustainable approach, which continues today. Others address health and obesity, with over 170 food outlets, breakfast clubs and nurseries, all part of a council-run scheme to offer healthier choices to customers. This and the city's commitment to healthy and sustainable catering standards in schools contribute to lower childhood obesity rates than England's average. Shared meals, lunch clubs and pay-as-you-feel cafes and shops work to reduce social isolation and food poverty. The only community-owned zero-waste pub in the UK, situated on a housing estate, receives surplus food and grows more in its own garden. Learning to cook and grow food is made possible through cooking courses for people of all income levels and a traineeship where participants exchange their time for a free organic growing course. Over 50 community gardens help increase biodiversity and improve people's physical and mental health. Local guidance adopted by the council encourages the integration of new food growing spaces in building development plans. Brighton and Hove is a gold sustainable food city, a place that has improved all parts of the food system, from farm to plate. Dozens of organisations, hundreds of initiatives and thousands of people from every walk of life are transforming the city through food, showing that every action counts and change is possible.
Thank you, Marissa. I think that one of the things that I like about that film is all the way through the way that the narrative is the community and the local authority working together, sort of doing their bits of specialism and working on the things that they're best placed to do. And that is actually kind of the heart of what we've been working on for the last few years.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. So I guess as that film showed, we've got quite a reputation in Brighton and Hove for working to transform our food system, and we won the Skilled Award, which means that we're national leaders in what we do. However, I'm sure the question that lots of people are thinking, and which I thought when I first joined the partnership, was where did we actually start and how did we get to where we are now? Because we've done a lot of work over the years.
Okay, so I think I'm just going to set this out into sort of 3 phases. I've done this talk in the past where I've spoken about a child growing up, you know, in terms of the different phases of its life. But I suppose the very beginning, I always imagine, like, I can imagine the room it took place in because I know the building, which is Hove Town Hall, which back then was a really traditional old council building. Okay, it has been refurbed since then. And I kind of imagine this quite dusty sort of dark room, and sat in this was some people from the local authority, some councillors, which are our political people, and some council officers who are the staff that work there, some people from the community and some people from the local health service. And they were basically having this what about food conversation. And the absolute truth is the idea of the food partnership, the food strategy and everything was actually born in that room where people were initially there to talk about an environmental sustainability plan and sort of had this what about food conversation. Then we throw in a little bit of luck, which is that based in Brighton and Hove, there's an organisation called Food Matters, who are a national food policy organisation who are about very much community-rooted behaviour. And they were invited to be part of this what about food conversation. And so the first thing they said to do was to actually map what we already had. So to map the food system. So if you look on that top green picture, it says May 2003. And that was when that was published. The work was kind of done before that, which just looked at what was there in terms of food. What came out of that then was this kind of sort of increasing interest in this idea of having a strategy and an action plan. And I'm going to say this so many times, we've always had both a strategic and an action plan, because getting momentum means you need to do things. And so one of the actions in the very first food strategy was to set up an independent food partnership. And in a way, I sort of treasure the people that were involved in that first meeting, the council officers, the councillors, the health people, and Food Matters, who I always think of as like our big auntie or something in this process, because they had the vision to say that this baby, this great idea needed to be nurtured by an independent organisation that wasn't going to be distracted by anything else, that was absolutely committed to the food partnership. And so to begin with, the aim was just to get people thinking about food together instead of bracketing it off as something that the health department did or something that the waste department did when they got rid of the rubbish. And we had a few key champions, officer and officials, that led the work. And when I first started, my first sort of ambition was to go from having 4 or 5 people who are champions to having lots more. So really making our gang a bit bigger. Next slide, please. So the building momentum phase was when we started trying to get food into everybody's work plan. And I think, you know, for some of them, it was really like an obvious thing that you do, like the schools, for example, could understand why you teach about food. But then for some of the other teams and departments, it became a bit more fun. We were like, oh, parking and transport. And then we're like, of course, it's about parking and transport. What do you do when you want to shop? How do you cycle there? Where do you park? So we became a bit obsessed with trying to get as many different people and partners involved in getting the food or conversation. We just ask questions. How can we help you achieve what you need to do? I come back to take away people's pain, right? And then they're more likely to want to work with you. And as an organisation, we started to create critical mass, and we created energy behind it. We communicate, we celebrate, we be the thing that wants people to join in with. I always say, throw a good party, people will want to be part of it, okay? So I think that it's an important part about being really positive about what you're doing well. And we have something we call generous leadership, which is basically, we don't need the credit, right? If this happens because somebody else has done something, just be really pleased about it. Don't worry about who gets all the praise, because when it comes back to it in the longer term, people will know who did it. Make it visible, gardens, meals, events, newsletter and social. Too much stuff stays in rooms and people don't get to see and hear about it. And because we know, and this is playing very much to a local authority, council, government thing, people love an award, right? So we used to apply for them so that different people could then, different politicians over time could feel that they were really being recognised for going the extra mile. Next slide, please. So where are we now? We are at the weirdest picture I think we could possibly have found. Thank you, Ruth, for that one. Is very much an embedded approach in the city. People come to us now to say, what about food? I'm no longer there at meetings waving my arm, going, please, please, please ask me a question. I want to ask about food, right? We definitely get approached, and that is a very, very different environment to be working in. It's also an approach for us understanding other systemic issues. So we're really getting people to start using food to have conversations, particularly around climate and poverty. Those are our absolutely massive agendas at the moment that people can understand better by using a food story. And we have got a local policy officer within a food policy officer within the local authority, which is amazing because rather than it being lots and lots and lots of people's jobs, we've got Angela, who we can have a really, really positive working relationship with, who can really, really push the agenda within the council. It's something we asked for a few years ago. It wasn't the right time for that question, so we've come back to it, and it's now the right time, and so that's brilliant. So I think that's me. Oh, no, it's not. I've got some tips. Sorry, there we go. That's what happens when you don't look at your slides properly. Ruth also said to me she was pretty sure that everybody would want to know what my top tips were for getting the local authority to be on side with you and to trust you. So I'm going to say my top tips are, it's okay to be at the beginning, right? Sometimes I think we intimidate people because they see how much we've achieved. And actually, at the beginning, we were just like everywhere else. And also, this kind of work is continuous beginnings. Every time a new agenda comes on or a new idea comes in place, you have to come back to it. Find your heroes. Some people just get it. Absolutely nurture them and let them be your champions. Anybody who's met me will know that this is part of my approach. You just keep talking and talking and talking about why it's important. People don't always hear it on the first go. People need to be listening with their right ears on rather than their busy ears or whatever. So just keep saying it again. Put effort in. For us, that was often about responding to consultations by actually saying what we did like as well as what we didn't. So much time, I think the community's natural response is to criticise, whereas actually you can also praise to help the local authority do the right thing. Positive stories and visits, go to events. I usually say find unusual allies, and sometimes the photo I use for this one is actually of our local football club's mascot, who is actually called Gully. He's a seagull. We are the seagulls, because we have a really good relationship with our local football club because actually they have great reach into some of the communities that we want to work with. And by working with the local football club, we actually get our message to more people. You wouldn't necessarily think a food partnership and a football club were actually working together closely. I've mentioned solving pain. Critical friend. This is where you actually are able to have conversations quietly in rooms about issues that are going on rather than angrily out on the streets, right? I love a protest, right? I'm all in favour of it when you need it, but I sometimes think that dialogue is what needs first. Find the hooks, which is basically about get even one sentence into different strategies, action plans about food, because then you can go back to people. You've got your foot in the door, for want of a better explanation. And the last thing I would offer is a tip is patience and persistence. Right, Jenga. I'm hoping Jenga works for all the countries that are listening to this conversation today. You know, when you're there and you're tapping on the bit of wood and it's not going, and then you go round and you tap on something else and it shoots out, right? You're finding the right partner, the right strategy, the right agenda for the right time. It's amazing how things move and change. Things you think would never, ever have happened suddenly are able to happen. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Vic. That's it's always really interesting to hear again, even though I've heard it before. And now I'm going to move on to Angela and just ask you, so from your perspective as someone who works for the council, what do you think the advantages are of having a local authority that works really closely with an independent NGO around food?
Hi there, thanks Ruth, and thanks Vic. It's really good to gather today and hear. I always learn new things every time that we talk. But I'm the food policy coordinator, and I'm in the economic development department, But my history in food policy was in public health originally. So everything that I've just heard there is, you know, I've been a part of working in another place. So when I came to Brighton, I can feel the things that Vic's just described. You know, I can feel the pride or the kind of support and the spread of connections within the council that have been worked with for so long. And some of the advantages, you know, I've only been there just over a year, but it does feel like a kind of, you know, a speeding up of time in a sense to be in Brighton and Hove, which is wonderful. The advantages that I have noticed are that the work can flow and grow between organisations. So like Vic just said about that game where you tap here and there and sometimes something doesn't move and sometimes it does. It keeps developing, you know, moving between different organisations. And also the work of the partnership, the real advantage is the work just simply makes sense. You know, we're talking about cooking and growing and sharing food or composting. It is the story of everyday life, but also it's the story of, you know, well, the strategic campaigns as well, that the politics of the work also. But I would say the advantage is the work makes sense from the food partnership. The councils, I know, you know, from having worked in public sector over 20 years now, that sometimes you know, there's a kind of things will be written and not dictated, but sometimes a strategy will happen and then it's tried to kind of get pushed through from a big council or government body. But really I've seen a big change, and where councils are learning to be supportive and a platform and to listen and learn. And being here in Brighton and Hove, I can say that I really see that in action. But there still is always that push from central government that they just want, you know, work to get done. Community organisations are actually doing things on the ground. So as we said, cooking, growing, you know, all the different activities with local organisations, it's visible, it's active. And when you are a resident, a citizen in the city, you hear about it. You hear about it for your friends and your neighbours and businesses. So instead of talking about a strategy, you talk about the activities that take place and are the real change. So the council is obviously, well, our council is a big landowner and landlord, and that's really important when you think of what is possible to happen within a city and where there is power and influence to do that. And obviously councils are scrutinised. So I know our food strategy obviously is monitored and there's action plans, but in the meetings that we have in the council will be scrutinised further for progress. But exactly what we heard before, having an external independent organisation that doesn't have to think of all the other things that come in, like a freedom of information request that I got yesterday, or like other things that are coming through that we have to deal with as a local authority. Being able to focus on food and always return to food is so important. Next slide, please, Ruth. And also, I've put down here some of the challenges that you notice, and it is true. You know, being a council officer, you know, what Vic was saying before, I've written here that we constantly have to fit everything into, I'm saying gov speak, government speak, like everything has to line up and make sense to our local councillors, the strategies, to big government. But in the end, we're trying to work on the same thing, the story of everyday life and the future of food. So that can be tough, always having to, you know, speak in the local authority voice. But I do think this council is developing a new conversation and a better narrative that's closer to everyday life. And I put here, the food work can grow anywhere. So when I say mushrooming, I mean, it just keeps multiplying and it's wonderful, but really being able to hold steady and navigate through that when every day there will be a new request, because the more visible you become, people want to contribute to the food work. So it's just being able to not be overwhelmed by all of that and find a way to, to keep things moving, thinking in both the long term, like of decades of time, but also what needs to be done tomorrow. So at the moment, working on some scoping work, we call it, for our city region, which is about decades ahead and a larger scale. But at the same time, we need to make decisions about this week and next week to do with emergency food and the cost of living crisis. I've put this one in, which I feel is true, that you meet general disappointment and anger with big government. That's the truth. We as local government, that's what we have to receive. So certain decisions that were made to do with, say, Brexit or handling cost of living crisis, you will face what residents experience and feel about that. And it's being able to still listen and work through that. So understanding sensitivities and being persistent, which we heard about before, gently persistent, and keeping options open. So sometimes, for example, something maybe to do with procurement or to do with reducing meat and dairy, we have to remember in our region that we also have the farmers, the meat farmers also, and how we keep moving forward positively together. And last slide, thanks, of my ones. And just very briefly, when Ruth asked about the future and what aspirations, this was what I wanted to say now. I really see this work, what the food partnership, the widest food partnership in Brighton Hove has done. It's created spaces of hope all across the city and conversations and the belief that change can happen, a confidence in that. So I think now it's about how the council becomes more brave itself to respond and make a few big decisions, that it's in its gift to do, but many, many small decisions that we continue to learn from across the city. And where I see us going, I think there becomes a tipping point with things like the climate emergency, or in UK, what we're experiencing, a cost of living crisis, where more support from all different political areas can come together and make the best decision possible. And what would I like to happen next? I put food news here, but really it's all those wonderful stories of what is actually happening, that's actually driving the change, of how I can filter and amplify that through the decision, people in the council and other partnerships, so that they can also hear and experience the positivity, because that's where I think you get the continuous flow of change. And I think it's back to Vic now, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, so much for offering your insights from the council perspective. It's really interesting to hear. And just to round off, because you've just been speaking about what you see as the future for this work, I'm going to hand over to Vic now, who's going to give us a little bit of insight into what she thinks the future for food partnerships within Brighton are, and what her ambitions are with this alliance. Thanks, Vic.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Ruth. When I saw Angela's slide, which said spaces of hope, actually, it made me feel really optimistic, because I don't know about everybody else. At the moment, we are dealing with a lot of really, really difficult things in terms of the levels of poverty in our city, the huge issues around waste and climate. And sometimes it can feel a little bit disheartening to regroup and go again and be positive. But then when I saw Angela's Spaces of Hope, and I was like, this is where you work in partnership with people, because you can help each other. When one person's finding something difficult, the other person can come in and be a partner with it. And so I came back to the tree that the Brighton Hove Food Partnership had put in the latest version of the Food Strategy and Action Plan, which was basically our 20-year vision of what we're trying to achieve by this work, by this partnership, by this kind of persistence and this enthusiasm. And it is like a beautiful tree, I feel. It's got a tree that's got like, it's got the vision on it. It's got the things that will be achieved, both the things we don't want, like lots of big carbon footprints and inequalities, but the things we do want, like happy people and healthier lifestyles. So my hope for the future, my ambition is that we continue to be able to deliver this. We continue to be able to work towards it. There was a webinar that was for the Sustainable Food Places Network, and I really would encourage anybody who's interested in this food systems, food partnership approach to actually look at that resource. It is UK based, but the resources are all really, really useful and replicable to other places. Ruth can probably drop the web address in the chat. And if you give me the next slide, Ruth, there was a presentation actually from Sustainable Food Places about a lot of the work that's going on at the moment. And Professor Corinna Hawkes from the City University of London was talking about food partnerships in tackling food system-wide issues and contradictions. And basically she said, be out loud and proud about what you're doing. It's more radical and important than you think. And I actually think I'd say the same to everybody involved in Edible City Solutions. It's like you are part of an amazing movement that is really making some big dents in some big system issues. And I'm really proud to be part of it. So thanks for inviting us to our lunchtime seminar. I think we've got time for questions, which Ruth's going to facilitate. Are you asking people to put them into the chat?
Yeah, either in the chat or people can raise their hands as they like. We've got
the cameras back on.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes for questions if people would like. So I'll just stop sharing my screen so I can see if there are any hands come up. But thanks for listening, everyone. Or maybe no questions today. Oh. Oh. Thanks. I'm not sure what your name is, Walstraver, but I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question. And then Martin, I think, had his hand up too, so I'll move on to him. But hi.
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, it's Vincent Walstra is my last name. But thanks for both your presentations. Really nice and positive images and presentations. Yeah, I had a question. I've done research with green and food initiatives, and I've noted that they tend to attract a certain public that's more green-minded, maybe a bit leftish oriented. You might recognize some of that and have your own maybe stereotypes of people who are attracted. And I was wondering what you do to make this more inclusive for everyone. I think there's different reasons that some people do come and some don't. There can be mind space or time or money or simply interest in these topics or knowledge about the initiatives at all if they're in a certain neighborhood and not in the other. Yeah, and I was wondering if you can say something, either of you, about who are the participants. Are they also what you say, like the maybe the more marginalized groups, if you want to bridge this gap with poverty, for instance, who are overrepresented, underrepresented, and what do you do to make it more inclusive, and did it work or not? One example I already heard was about the football club, which I thought was really nice. So these unusual allies, but yeah, I was curious to hear more about that.
Thanks, Vincent. I think, yes, it's always a concern, an issue and question that different places are aware of. I suppose one of the approaches we've taken over time is to actively support projects in those neighborhoods or with communities that perhaps were underrepresented for some reason or other. So for us, actually understanding our city is actually quite a geographical thing. It's not a very big city, but it's really, really hard to get from west to east on public transport, for example. So and also the vibe in the center of the city is quite different to the neighborhoods where people live. So when you look on the maps of where projects are, and that could be where the meal projects are, where the composting is, where the gardens are, it's about trying to have distribution across the city. It's also, I think, the point that you referenced about the, how much people's time is available to do, it's like if you're having to work every hour there is in order to actually feed yourself, the idea that you then have time to go down and volunteer at the community garden is just insane. So but actually by working as networks across the whole city and sharing like information and good practices is what's helped. A lot of the projects have very, very low level of entry requirement. You can just come and sit in the space. If it's a garden, if it's the cooking project, some people come and volunteer, some people come and eat. So it's trying to address all of those barriers and trying to actually ensure that it feels quite normalized for when people are there. I would say that it is an ongoing issue, but not necessarily in such a bad way. I think there is now probably more unexpected projects than there are expected ones. In the film, the project was called The Bevy, which is actually an old pub that is now run as a community pub, which has gardening, cooking, Meals on Wheels delivery service. It does also have a bar, but it's reimagining spaces in different ways. So yes, always a work in progress, I'd say. Martin, shall I just let you ask your question while you've got your hand up?
Well, I liked your hint that you can address very different and quite a range of issues, looking at them through a food perspective. I wonder whether you ever tried or whether you think it possible to just say, we look at the entire SDGs from our food perspective and try to cover them all from this approach. Do you think this would be possible?
Often I think anything's possible. We have looked at the Sustainable Development Goals, like for the ones that most naturally relate to us, but it's like the idea of then taking the exercise one step further feels to me something like one of the academics in this partnership might be better placed to do. But it's like the idea there is very little that you cannot actually address through a conversation around food. I think is probably maybe the air you breathe might not be. Angela, do you have any thoughts?
It's a really good question, and in the city region work where we're scoping the other 6 local authorities that make up the city region, and that's for the Economic Development Board. So when I'm looking through their economic strategies, even though everyone has some form of food partnership or even a basic kind of food bank partnership, but when I look at their economic development strategies, I'll see a link to sustainable development goals. And even though there are many, I mean, I know there's at least 13 that are food is highly important for, and that important moves at different times, but that's where I'm seeing a key communication that I can keep that the kind of economic, social, environment conversation going at that city region level. So yeah, I will be keeping that in focus, but at the same time, I think the development of the food partnerships and strategies, just like we've heard about today, is essential to keep that the kind of broad everyday picture going that then links to the Sustainable Development Goal.
I noticed that Sarah has asked a question in the chat, part of which actually, Angela, is probably over to you, is for you, which is this the bit about farmers and food producers. Oh, Sarah, you're there. Do you want to ask your own question?
I can do that. Yeah, I was wondering, I'm based in Southern Ireland, working for a bioregional weaving lab that's looking more about, and an organisation that's called GIY, Grow It Yourself. It's been working very nationally, but hasn't been doing so much place-based stuff. So we're now trying to think more place-based. And I've been wondering, yeah, these three questions really. One is, how do you monitor change? Do you document it, and how do you show the kind of changes you're making in so many different ways? We're also really looking at how do we bring in the local farmers and help them to make the transition to more organic and regenerative sort of ways, and link that to the towns that we're working with. And finally, I'm in a big sort of mapping phase at the moment, and I'd just love to see some of the maps that you've mentioned and what they actually look like, because that visualization is so important.
Thank you. I'll have a go at answering. Excellent questions, and three in there. So remind me if I don't catch the last one. But monitoring is absolutely key. And I mean, otherwise, just like Vic says, it's just words on paper, you know, a strategy, unless you can actually see what happened and coming into post. That's what me and particular colleagues are trying to do, is to follow up, to find those examples of what actually happened when people said that they support or adopt a policy, maybe to do procurement or planning. And it's difficult, I'm not going to pretend, because you know, monitoring is often seen as something, you know, hard to do, but what we're trying to do is position it as good news stories. So for example, we have a planning advisory note where about food growing in major developments. And I know, for example, from monitoring, the case officer said, you know, he can look and see where that is now being mentioned, they're committed to in their sustainability appraisal or in another way. So I know 50% of the 10 have mentioned it, but that's not enough. Now it's actually, can I meet the developer? When is completion? And what has been grown? What was planted? Did it work? That's just one example. And then the same kind of thinking for a procurement policy, etc., etc. About the farmers, the city region work also, you know, there was some excellent mapping done recently by Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming in East Sussex, well, East Sussex and another area. And they're actually going to gather people, I think this or next week, to look at the next stages about developing infrastructure and support. So whether that's to do with horticulture, livestock, farming, and what the needs are. So getting very timely information that I wasn't finding through economic strategies, etc., that are years and years old. And I mean, even the basic information about employment, land use for growing, it's hard to get the most up-to-date information. So, I mean, I saw some wonderful work done by Leeds University through a global food security program that had all, you know, really recent information. So it's trying to tap in with universities and academics doing that work right now and use it instantly. And oh, that is mapping I'm talking about. But other than that, I think, you know, there's so many different forms of mapping, from very, you know, high-tech GIS using big data sets to actually just looking at what's in the area. And my favorite recent mapping was when the University of Brighton did a walk around the city about seeing urban food futures and thinking about what is possible in other ways in smaller spaces. And again, I think that comes back to the first question from Vincent, that saying, you know, how do people that might not engage, you know, maybe not activists or campaigners or wanting to compost or etc., are able to, in being able to see the city itself in a different way that others can engage with through simply being there or going about their daily activities. I hope that's some help. Is there anything else, Vic or Ruth?
No, I guess all I would add is that within the food strategy, we do have a aims outcome impact framework. And the complexity, though, it's like you can write it, the complexity is even within each of those outcomes, the number of indicators and things that you could use are enormous, and you could get a little bit lost in it. I mean, I was like, you know, improving diet and reduction in the number of people with diet-related ill health is one example. And it's like, but there's loads and loads of metrics in there. So one of the things we sort of also had with this is, whilst we do want to measure it and we try to triangulate all we can, you also sometimes have to go with seeing what you believe, you know, seeing and believing it, and being in a space that you actually feel that the stuff is happening and the attitude is there. And so I'm always like, it's really funny because it's like everyone's wanting to do the mapping, and then I suddenly go, oh, but it's like you could spend all your energy doing this, and actually what's the balance? So yeah, I think good luck with it. I'll be really interested to see more.
I mean, just to add on to what, because Vic's made me think of something else when in speaking there, it's true that, you know, I could spend all my time monitoring just the planning and the procurement policy, but then I wouldn't be able to progress the other work that, you know, is coming from new and different places, and you know, might have more to do with equity, say, or, you know, something else that's happening. But what I am finding as a council officer is when I come in, obviously we've declared a climate emergency and we're doing carbon disclosure reporting, which is not perfect, but the metrics that are asked in there about food insecurity and about procurement. So I'm trying to triangulate also and double up things, triple things, you know, so that and that goes through, you know, our carbon neutral program, and then I can relate it to city region sustainable development goals. So it's trying to find threads of metrics. Like, I know that the Milan Urban Food Policy Pat is wonderful, you know, it's metrics, or sustainable food places, our own food strategy. But like Vic said, being in a very active place of, you know, where a whole lot of things are coming together can, you know, then give more confidence, but not to ignore the full extent of what's happening across the food system.
Thanks, Angela. I'm just gonna wind down questions now because we've got like 3 minutes left. But that was a really interesting discussion. And if anyone has anything they want to follow up, please do get in contact with us. I will put our generic email address in the chat, or Vic can, just in case anyone wants to follow this up in more detail. And just to close, I'm just going to flag up some of the next events that are happening within the Edible Cities network, so you can have more exciting content like today. So the 25th of May is the big day to look out for, because there is the third Edible Cities networking session. So that it's quite an informal session. It's on a platform called Wonder Me, which kind of allows you to wander in and out of different conversations. And it's a chance just to meet people from across the network. So that means meeting people from across Europe who are involved in sustainable urban food, and having the opportunity to chat about your experiences, your frustrations, your highlights, anything really, just the opportunity to connect with people from across our network who are involved in urban food work. So that's on May the 25th. That's 1 till 2 p.m. Central European time, or 12 till 1 p.m. British time. And on the same day, from 3 till 4 p.m. Central European time, or 2 till 3 p.m. British time, there's an Edible Cities Network Marketplace event, which is for any organisation or NGO or initiative that, again, is working with sustainable food. And this session is all about presenting. This session is going to be hosted by Alice Bischoff. She's a member of the network, and she's going to present a tool for helping organisations to analyse and strategiise the work that they're doing, as well as showing them how to talk about the work they're doing with sustainable urban food, which I know can be a difficult thing. So these are both free, and you know, we'd love to see you there, and really recommend coming along. Finally, I hope I've got the date right, Marissa. Save the date for the 7th of July. There is going to be a session on about water innovation in cities. There'll be some details coming up very soon after this webinar, so just keep your eyes peeled for that and save the date. But if you liked this webinar and you want to check out the others that have been put on, then please visit the website on the slide, edicitnet.com/webinars, and you'll find things about urban agriculture, like making cities, building with integrated agriculture. And finally, just before you all leave, Marissa, I think has or is about to put a link to a survey in the chat. You've got 30 seconds before it hits 1 p.m. So we'd love if you spent those 30 seconds filling out that survey. And that's everything from me. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Vic, thanks Angela, and thanks Ina.